Hi everyone. Recently, I got asked a lot about configuration properties in Spring Boot project. So I thought it's a good time to show you guys how you can actually use this cool feature in a working Spring Boot project. And before we dive right into today's topic, for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Jasper. I am a full stack developer and also working as a tech lead at a Fortune 500 company. So in this channel, every week I share videos regarding knowledge on Spring Boot, Spring Framework, and Angular Framework. And from time to time, I also share videos on career tips. So if you're interested in any one of these topics, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out any cool things that I share out there every week. So without further ado, let's jump right into today's topic. So today's agenda will cover 9 things in total. The first thing we're going to look at is how to set up a Spring Boot project in IntelliJ IDE itself. The second we're going to look at is how to do a simple properties binding. And the third thing we're going to do is immutable fields binding. And the fourth thing we're going to look at is Spring Relax binding rule. And the fifth thing we're going to look at is how to do nested properties binding. And the sixth thing we're going to do is default property conversion. And the seventh thing we're going to look at is custom property conversion. And the eighth thing we're going to look at is binding properties into third-party bins. And the last thing we're going to look at is validation on properties. So let's go with the first things first, Maven setup. I've already opened my IntelliJ and we will create a Spring Boot project in IntelliJ itself to complete today's tutorial. So let's go to File, then click on New, then choose Project, and from here we're gonna pick the Spring Initializer option from the set bar and pick up our SDK version. I only have the Java 8 installed, so that's my only option. And here we'll leave it as is. Then we'll click on Next. And here we're gonna put in some metadata about our Maven project. So artifact name, we're just gonna call it a property because we're doing configuration properties tutorial today. And this is gonna be Java, packaging is jar, and the version we'll pick Java 8, which matches with our SDK. And here we'll change the description, usage demo for configuration properties, and the package, I don't need the trading part, and this looks good to me. And I'll click on next. Now here you're basically going to choose the dependency that you need. For me, for this tutorial, I only need one additional dependency, which is the validation dependency, to show you how to do property validation later on. And click on next, and I'm happy with where this project is going to be saved. So I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to click on finish. And here we go. So we have the project created. And now let's talk about the next thing in our agenda, which is how to do simple properties binding. So let's go to the main folder. Here we'll see that we have a main class, just like any other Java application. And we're gonna create a property holder class to hold simple properties. So I'm just gonna call it simple properties. Once I have this class created, I need to annotate it with configuration properties annotation. And whenever you use this annotation, you need a prefix. So prefix, I'm just gonna call it simple. And this class basically has two properties. One is a string, let's call it text. Then another one is an int, let's call it number. And you need to register this simple properties as a bean in the Spring container. To do that, we can use component annotation, and by default Spring Boot will inject properties into this into the object that is created using this class by using setter injection. So we need to create setters, and I'm just going to create a toString method as well, so we can print the content of this class or this object later on. Next thing we want to do is we want to create the actual property that gets binded to the object that's created from this class. Here under resources, we already have automatically created application properties for us to use. So the first one we'll do simple properties, and we'll call it simple text, and the value is just gonna be, this is simple text, simple number. We're just gonna do it 114. Now let's go back to our main class to actually inject the simple properties into it so that we can print its content. So we're gonna auto wire the simple properties in, because now the simple properties is managed by Spring Container, because we have the add component annotation on top. So let's declare this simple properties as an instance variable, and let's print its content. We'll do system out print line, simple properties info. Then we'll just put it this way, and let's run this application, see what do we get. Okay, now as expected, we can see this is indeed what we put in the application properties, and it got binded to the simple properties in the field text and a number, and we successfully used this line, printed out the content of the simple properties object. Another thing I want to talk about is, besides using this to register as being in a Spring Container, we have two other ways to do it. Both of them require us remove the Spring stereotype annotation. So the first way is to use this other annotation, enable configuration properties, and here we're going to write the configuration properties class, and if we run this again, we should see the same result again. Yep, so this shows this way also works. And the third way is to use configuration properties scan. This is like the component scan annotation. However, this does not scan any class that is annotated with component, but instead it scans only class that is annotated with configuration properties annotation. So if we run this again, we should see the same result as well. Yep, so we can see it's working. Okay, and when we use, and we can see it's working. And the next thing I want to talk about is immutable properties. Okay, so we create a new class called Immutable properties, and immutable basically means your attribute is marked as funnel. So once its value is set, you cannot change its value. So we'll do this, and we'll just call it text, and we'll call it final double number. And here we'll do we use configuration properties annotation again and give it a prefix. This time we just call it immutable. And you can see here it has the red lines beneath. That means we have to create constructors to set these values. We cannot use setters because they're final variables. So let's go ahead, create a constructor. And SpringBoot also supports to use constructor binding. To do that, we have to use another annotation called configuration constructor binding. But in this, we don't need the setter anymore. We can just use the constructor to bind properties into these fields. And like always, we'll create a toString method that will allow us to print the content of this class. Okay, now let's head over to application.properties and let's define those two immutable properties. So immutable properties, and we'll call it immutable text. This text is immutable number 345. Once we do this, let's head over to main class and let's inject this immutable properties and print its content as well. Immutable properties, and here we just copy and paste and change this to immutable and change this to immutable properties. In order to be less clustered, let's comment out this section. So let's run this application again. Okay, so as expected, we get the properties that we just set, right? This text is immutable, number is 345. That is indeed what we put here. So now you know how we can do property bindings through constructor. In the later videos of this tutorial, I will be using constructor binding all the time, so that we don't have a lot of boilerplate code. So next thing I want to talk about is Spring Relax binding rules. So let's create another property called private final relax binding. Okay, and let's create a constructor that contains this field, and let's create a new toString method to print the new field's content. Okay, now let's head over to this application properties file again. Let's run relax binding, right? So it's camel kits, so that means it is two words. So what does relax binding mean? Relax binding means if you do this, it will successfully be bundled. So we can test this out. You can see here the relax binding is there, and if we do underscore, it will work as well. Here you can see the works. If we do underscore, we can see it works as well. You can see here relax binding also is there, and we can also do relax binding. You can see this is also working. So SpringBoot is not very strict in terms of how you name your properties, and that gives you a little bit of flexibility to name the properties in however way you want. Okay, and next thing I want to talk about is how to bind to nested properties. So let's create a new class called nested properties, and here we will define a property of type list, and we'll just say strings, and we'll define another property another map property, dictionary, and as always we'll need to use configuration properties annotation and give it a prefix. We'll call it nested, and we'll do a constructor binding, and we can also try to inject into a field that is of a user-defined type. So we can try to do something called like an item, and here we'll create a new field called private string name private int quantity, and we'll create a constructor for these, and we'll create a toString method in order to print its content. So now let's come back to this and add this field in. Oh, so we misspell this. Let's correct this, capitalize that. Okay, so let's create a constructor and then create a toString method. Awesome. So let's go back to application properties and define the properties for these fields. Nested properties, by the nested list, and the first content of the list, we'll call it McDonald nested list. The second item, we'll call it Burger King, and then we'll do the dictionary, Cambridge, yes, nested dictionary, Cambridge, English, yes, and we'll define the value for nested atom. We'll call it item name is hammer, and this quantity we'll say 13. And let's go back to the main class to inject these properties, private nested properties, and we'll print this content like we always do. Change this word to nested properties, call it nested properties, and let's run this application again to see what we get. Oh yeah, so like we expected, here the dictionary works perfectly fine. Yes, English yes, Cambridge yes, item works fine as well. But interesting, the strings is no. So what is wrong? So we call this variable strings, and what do we have here? Oh, aha, of course, this is wrong because it's not called this. Instead, it's called strings. So let's correct this and try again. Aha, so this time we got it correct. We see it's McDonald's and Burger King. So far, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop a comment in the comment section below, and I will get back to you regarding your questions. So up to this point, if you have any questions to the things that I already talked about, make sure that you don't hesitate to drop a comment in the comment section below, and I will get back to you on those. Now, next thing we want to talk about is property conversion. So SpringBoot already supports some default type conversion. I will show you what they are and how to use them. And so in order to do that, let's create another class called property conversion, or let's call it converted properties. And like always, we need to write the conversion properties annotation and give it a prefix. Let's call it converted. Let's call it duration, private period. Let's import the missing clause, and let's create another property which is of type data size. Data size. Let's head over to application.properties, and to define the actual properties here, we'll call it converted properties, converted duration, and we'll do 14 nanoseconds, and we'll do converted period. We'll call it 3 years and 15 days. And we'll define a converted data size. Let's give it a value of 24 terabytes. And now let's head back to the main class. Let's inject this converted properties bin into this class. Private converted properties. Like always, we'll do a copy paste, and I will do converted properties info. We'll do converted properties. Oh, I forgot to define constructor, and then we need to use structure binding. Next, I want to define some getters. Cool. Now let's head back to here, and then we should have get duration, and we can do things like 2 nanos, converted properties, get period, get years, and we can do converted properties, get period, get days, and here we'll do nanoseconds. We'll print out the converted properties, the data size to terabytes. And let's run this application, see what do we get. Awesome, so this is indeed what we entered. If we come back here, we see that we entered 40 nanoseconds, 3 years, 15 days, and 24 terabytes. So this unit actually matters. So instead of a nanosecond, you can do something like seconds, microseconds, milliseconds, microseconds. You can even do days. And if you don't specify anything by default, it's milliseconds. And here you can do years, days, and you can also do weeks. And for sizes, of course, you can do terabytes, gigabytes, megabytes, bytes. And if you don't say anything for the unit, by default it is bytes. So these are all the out-of-box supported data type conversion. Now, sometimes you may want to create some sort of converter to convert your custom property. So to do that, we need to create a converter for the specific type. So let's first create a class called custom property, and here we'll give it some fields like property name, boolean, immutable, and we'll create a setter and getter, and we'll even create a toString method for us to print its content later on. And let's go back to the converter properties and let's define another property, another field, which is of type custom property, and let's change this constructor to include this new field. And let's add a getter. Awesome. So let's say this custom property is in this format, custom, and immutable is false. Now to set this, we need a custom converter in order to map the value in this format into the fields name and immutable respectively. So let's create that. Let's create a custom property converter, and we need to register this as a bin, and we need to annotate the class with configuration properties binding. In this class, we need to implement the Spring Converter interface, and the source is the Spring, target is custom property, and we have to implement the method from the super interface convert. And here we'll do things like we'll split the source field. We can split it using comma because that's what we use to separate the field's value. And let's create a constructor. Okay, so let's come back to this and let's create this custom property. We'll do boolean value of this one. Okay, and let's go back to the main class to inject these properties in it so we can print this content. Actually, we already injected, so we can just print this content. Converted properties, get custom property, get name, immutable is immutable, and let's run this application, see what do we get. And as expected, it's correctly mapped these fields into the properties. So you can see custom here and false is here. So in any case, if you need a custom converter to convert fields into properties, you can create your own custom converter in the same way as what I did. And next we want to look at is we can actually annotate add configuration properties on top of a bin method. So this is particularly useful if you try to set properties in a third-party bin. And to see this in action, let's go back to the main class, and here we can create a method, create a bin method, and we can create a new class called bin properties, and we'll call it we'll give a field name. Okay, and we'll use a setter, give it a setter, then we'll come back to here and we'll define a bin of that type, bin properties, return new bin properties, and we'll annotate this method with configuration properties, and we'll give it a prefix like we always do. We'll call it a bin. And let's go to application properties and create the property, the actual property. So we'll call it bin properties, and we'll do bin name test bin. And let's head back to the main class, and here let's try to inject these properties so that we can print its content. Bin properties, and let's print its content. Bin properties. We didn't define a getter. Okay, let's define a getter. Now let's get the name out of it. And let's comment out this and hit run. See what do we get. We should be able to get the bin name out. Failed to band properties. Failed to convert string to custom property. Let's see, what did we get? Okay, so we need to do this. And let's run again. See here, we got the correct bin name. So once again, this is particularly useful if you try to set properties in a third-party bin or component. And you can use this pretty cool hack to do it. The last thing I want to talk about is property validation. So far we have seen that we can easily create properties and use SpringBoot to map them. So, but sometimes we may need to have validation in place. In such cases, we can use standard constraint annotation, things like lens. And here we can specify min max. We can say min to 1 and max equal to 3. And we need to annotate the class with validated annotation so that Spring creates an advisor that will do this validation check for us. Now let's run this application, see what do we get. You see that it says it complains that length must be between 1 and 3, and clearly this value is not, right? It's far more than 3 characters. So if we update this to 15, if we run this application again, we see this time it passes, no error at all. So besides length, there are also a lot of other annotations you can use, things like a min, max. You can also use a regex pattern. They're all JavaX validation constraints. Some of them could be Hibernate constraints. So with the help of these validation constraints, it really makes our code neat. We don't have to do a lot of if-else. Instead, we can rely on the constraint annotation and the backing validator to do the validation for us. So before we wrap up, just a recap to today's topic. Today we covered the 9 things in total. They are Maven setup, simple properties binding, immutable fields binding, Spring relaxed binding, nested properties binding, property conversion, custom property converter, configuration properties annotation on a bin method, and the last but not least, property validation. So that's it for this week. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope I answered all your configuration properties related questions in this video. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button for me. That will really motivate me to make more videos like this in the future. And don't forget to drop me a comment in the comment section below. Tell me what you guys want to know next, and I will plan my videos accordingly. Before I let you guys go, just a reminder, don't forget to subscribe to me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I will upload contents there that you don't find it here. And that's it. I will see you guys next week. Bye for now.